With the help of the Almighty, I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message and so sanctify His name and, inshallah, bring peace to the world. Assalamu alaikum. Greetings to everybody. Today is a special day. In regard to this topic, you asked about why the rabbis refer to this as a rebellion against God. And today, which we came to Toronto with the help of the Almighty to stand and declare our opposition, our disapproval of what there was this march in support of the state of Israel. And we stood on the other side and decried this as a terrible crime, a terrible Nakba, which is the right word for this occupation. And it was the day that was to commemorate the passing of a great rabbi in Europe. His name, and I mentioned it in my speeches today, his name was Rabbi Chaim Elazar Shapiro. He was the rabbi of Munkac, we say Minkac in Hungary. He passed away in 1937. So that was basically like 11 years before the ratification of the State of Israel by the United Nations. But Zionism, contrary to what people think, Zionism, which is the ideology behind creating the state, was was almost 75 years before when they actually created the state, and it was created by people in Europe, in Austria, and throughout Europe, and these people were known to the rabbinical authorities, to the leaders of Judaism, and they knew who these people were, these Zionists were, and they stood in opposition to them from day one. So, as in respect for this great rabbi, the Minkacher Rebbe of blessed memory, I just would like to quote one statement from him that he's talked about the Zionists in one of his great books that he published, which was called Shari Yisachar. And he said, the Zionists who say that they are nationalists, but not believers or religious, they proudly say they're nationalists. They have today we call them they call themselves a democratic republic, the only democratic republic in the Middle East. It was the farce, but what that is. But anyway, but basically, so let me quote him word for word. He said, the Zionists who say they are nationalists, but not believers or religious, are like a body without a soul. They are dead bodies. And this is what our sages meant when they said that the wicked, even during their lives, are called dead. They defile whoever comes in contact with them, for they are the ultimate source of defilement. And that's how we refer to as the Zionists. They are the ultimate source of defilement. He was a great holy man, and he saw with his pure eyes, he saw right to the point, to the root of what these Zionists are. So when we say that they are a rebellion against God, it is encasing the knowledge and the wisdom, the holiness of all the great leaders of Judaism throughout Europe, who recognized and knew the movers and shakers of this movement of Zionism. But let us understand, what is Zionism? In reality, anybody with a little, he doesn't have to be the greatest sage. He's simply somebody with a clear thinking mind will understand that Zionism and Judaism are diametric opposites. They are contradictory. They are antithetical. They simply cannot work together. They are the opposite ends of the spectrum. And so let's just try, God should give me the short words and the concise, because really it encompasses so much. It's, as many eloquent speakers spoke today, they said the Nakba is not something that happened 75 years ago. The Nakba is an ongoing tragedy that's continuing daily. I refer to it as a long chain of tragedy, and every time they add another link, and that link they solder onto that chain by every time with the works of Satan trying to embellish it, to make it look like it is something holy. Each link, by and of itself, they try to create a narrative and a picture as if this is something righteous and something holy. And that's how they build one settlement after the other, one link to the chain, one murder after the other murder daily. What is happening just in this year, over 30 deaths already in this year, and I'm afraid a lot more that they've done already to the Palestinian people, whether it is in Gaza or whether it is in other parts in the West Bank or wherever it may be in occupied Palestine. So let us try, with God's help, to understand the root of Zionism. Zionism is a movement of people from around 100 to 150 years ago, and these people declared that they want to make a nationalism. Now, what is Judaism? Judaism is subservience to God. It was the acceptance of Jews 3,000 years ago, when Moses went up on Mount Sinai and took the Torah from God, made a covenant with the Jews that they should be subservient to him, that they should obey all the laws of the Torah. The laws of the Torah is our compliance, our acceptance of God as the master of the universe. And we have to emulate God. It says, Mahu rachu mafata terachim. Just as God is compassionate, you should be compassionate. We're not allowed to steal, kill. We have to be kind. We're supposed to be doing the will of the Almighty. That is all what Judaism means. It's the compliance, the subservience to the Almighty, and nothing else. But it's strictly observed by observing the laws of the Torah. We've been doing this for 3,000 years. Zionism is a movement of a mere 100-odd years, and it is a transformation to base nationalism, as the Minkatcher Rebbe said that I mentioned before. It's pure nationalism. It's a group of people that yearned and strived to and aspired to make their own country with all the strappings of a nationhood, with an army, with a Olympic team, with if they can have Nobel Prize winners and anything that they can boast about to the countries that they're not a third world country. They're just up on top with all the other leading countries of the world. This is what Zionism is, and that's what they keep on boasting about themselves. There happens to be that this concept of having a country flies in the face of Judaism. It's contradictory to subservience to God. Because when they declare, oh, we are a nationalism, and you can do what you want in our country, and they will have gay march right through the center of Jerusalem with everybody, as we've seen today in Toronto, them dressed totally immodestly, the women, and boys and girls singing together, and everything that they do is just totally to show their disobedience to the Almighty, their total disregard for the commands of the Torah, that God says you should be a holy nation. You should be, holiness means morality. Holiness means modesty. Holiness is everything that the Zionists are not. And that they flaunt their total release from all of that which we consider holy. They say they're a democracy. How dare you say you're a democracy if you're supposed to be subservient to God? You can't pick and do whatever you like. You have to listen to the laws of God. So the root of Zionism is rooted in blasphemy and heresy and rebellion against God. Another point that they have is they always try to look to solidify and to legitimize their creation of a state. So when they turn to other Jewish people who do believe in God, so they have to somehow cover up for all their rotting that is from the inside out. So what do? So they say, oh, we have to protect ourselves. You have to understand. Instead of talking about the fact that they're based nationalism, so they say, we have to protect ourselves. So they have to have some reason for their existence. So they say, we have to protect ourselves. Because look, what did you do? For 3,000 years or 2,000 years since you're in exile, 2,000 years you were beaten, you were murdered because you refused to give up your Judaism. You were murdered, burnt at the stake in Spain and Portugal. And what happened now by Hitler? Look what happened by Hitler. Although they started well before Hitler, but they said, look what happened by Hitler, you were murdered. So we have to protect ourselves. So in other words, you see, you point out to them that since the destruction of the temple, God warned the Jews that you're in exile. You are forbidden to create a Jewish sovereignty because it's a godly decreed exile. So they say, look what happened. You believed that God's going to protect you. You see what happened to you. We must protect ourselves. So now, if you just study those words, that is rooted in blasphemy. In other words, you're saying that God, saying that he's going to protect us. No, God doesn't have the power. God is weak, God forbid to say that. Yeah. We're going to protect ourselves. We have to have an insurance policy. We have to have a gun. Because where was God by Hitler? They scorn us. They ridiculed the religious Jews. They say, where was God when they were being thrown, the Jews, into the oven in Auschwitz? So they're rooted in blasphemy. They're rooted in heresy. The whole concept is rooted in saying God can protect us. We're going to protect ourselves. So how dare they use the name Judaism? Here, on one side of the coin, they say they're a Jewish state, and they pick the Star of David, who said, Hashem Hoshia, God is going to protect me. HaMelech, the king, Ya'anenu, is going to answer us on the day that we call B'Yom Kareinu. On the day we call him, God protects us. And they turn around, they use that Star of David as their symbol, and then they turn around and say, where is God to protect us? We have to have guns. So they're rooted in blasphemy, and yet they have the audacity, the hubris, the chutzpah, we say in Hebrew, to use the religion as a facade, to legitimize their concept, their entity. So it's rooted in blasphemy. Now this is all before it was
facade?
Even created.
What does that word mean, facade?
Facade means the outside, the like you take a building and you make it very fancy from the outside, but inside it's rotten. It has nothing to do with what they present themselves as.
Is this a Hebrew word?
Facade is English.
Oh,
it's English,
okay.
Pure English.
Because in Arabic, facade means corruption.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, the facade means the outside picture.
Okay.
Now, this Zionism, this is what it's rooted in. So they just plain nationalists, nothing to do with God. They explain themselves away because they say we have to protect ourselves. They use fear-mongering and the suffering of Jews. But again, they really have nothing with God. Now, when this is all in its theory, in what we would call the keren, in the seed of Zionism, before it was actually planted in the ground, when they came along and they created their state, then the fact in the ground, this was the creation of a monster, a Nakba, that is rebelling against God in its actions, in its thought process, in its essence. It's pure heresy, but it didn't come into action until they created their state. When they turned to Palestine and created their state, and of course, as many people who ever studied the history of Zionism knows that these people, these fathers of this movement, never wanted to go to Palestine. They wanted to go to a lush land, a fruitful land, a productive land where they will be able to develop their homeland, their country. And they wanted to go to Patagonia, next to Argentina. They wanted to go to Uganda. They had many plans. And the only reason they turned to Palestine to create this state was because some of their decision makers, or some of their wise men amongst them, said, you're never going to get the colossal amount of backing that you need to create a country, to create a homeland. You need some other reason that people will support you, that will throw you the dollars, that will give you the backing to create a country. So they said, if you'll turn to Palestine, and then you guys are a bunch of children of Jews, so all you have to do is turn to Palestine and wave the Torah and say, oh, this is the godly given land that God gave us, and God wants us to return to him. So you'll get, in one fell swoop, you're going to get the Christian, evangelistic Christians who also believe that the children of Israel should be in the Holy Land, and they'll support you. You'll get the Jews who don't know the Torah. Unfortunately, many Jews at that time, when they started, were already non-religious. And they don't know, they're ignorant to of what the Torah states, and they're going to simply support you because of the emotional issue of going to the Holy Land, which they talk about, even though they don't practice the Torah, they don't keep the Ten Commandments, they don't keep the Sabbath, they don't keep kosher, and everything that a Jew has to keep. But these Jews, they know that they have this emotional attachment to the Holy Land, and they'll support you, especially if you don't demand of them that they should keep the Torah. So you have the cake and eat it, what the world would say. In other words, here you'll have that piece of land, you'll have your attachment to the land, and you'll feel you're doing God's will instead of even keeping the laws of Torah that God required of you, of kosher, of Sabbath. So they turned to these non-affiliated, non-attached Jews, and they said, support us. We're going to now return to the land that God gave us. So they picked Palestine. Now, when they came and they decided to create their state in Palestine, with this, they created another level in their rebellion against God. Why? Because God, with God sees everything in the future that will happen. God foresaw that people will rebel against him. And when he sent the Jews into exile 2,000 years ago with the destruction of the temple, he forewarned the Jewish people. He put us on the oath. And this is King Solomon, who built the temple, wrote in his book of prophecies called Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. He wrote there, he said, God said to the Jewish children, I'm putting you on the 3 oaths. An oath is a very stringent command and demand. It's more than the laws of the Torah. It's the most stringent issue, an oath that God put us under. And these 3 oaths are: 1, we should not return en masse. God warned the Jews, I'm dispersing you amongst the lands. You should be spread out amongst the world. And do not, it is a punishment, it is a decree of exile. And do not attempt to return en masse in large numbers to the Holy Land. That's 1 oath. Secondly, do not rebel against the nations. You have to be loyal citizens in every country you reside. Whether you're in Canada, you're in the United States, whether you're in Iran, wherever it may be, you have to be loyal citizens in every country you reside. Third, do not make any attempt to end exile. Now, when these Zionists came along and decided to create their homeland, their sovereignty in the Holy Land, in Palestine, they breached all of these 3 oaths. They said, we're the beginning, Eschalta de Gula, beginning of redemption. Everybody should come up, join us, make Aliyah. Maybe you heard that word, Aliyah they call it. Come up. Everybody should come up and join them. Clearly rebelling against the oath that God says, do not return en masse. And they ignore that, as if it doesn't exist, the words of God. And they say, everybody come up, let's join and go up to the Holy Land. Secondly, they're rebelling against the nations. They're rebelling against the inhabitants of Palestine. Because again, contrary to what the Zionist narrative was for 75 years that it was a land without a people, for a people without a land, that it was an empty land. Everybody who now knows the truth knows that the majority of people living there were the Muslim community, and then there was the Christian community, and a very holy religious Jewish community, all three opposing this heretic movement of Zionism. So when they decided to create their state there, they breached the oath, the 3 oaths of exile. They said we should return en masse, rebel against the nations, and God says, do not make any attempt to end exile. They call themselves the beginning of redemption. They have totally disrespected the Almighty and His words. And that is what Zionism is. On top of all these 3 issues, there's another issue. God commands the Jews, we should emulate God, as I started these words. God says, Mahu rachum afateter, just as God is compassionate, you should be compassionate. You should emulate God. You should show respect for others. You should do kindness for others. You should show gratitude done to you. We know that the Jewish people lived together in Muslim and Arab countries for hundreds and over 1,000 years, and in countries we lived in Iran for over 2,000, Yemen for over 2,000 years, and we lived in peace with the Arab neighbors. And when in the Islamic nationhoods, we lived under them, where they embraced us. Not only they embraced the Jewish people, they invited the Jews in. When we were being massacred in Europe, they said, come. And they gave us a home. They gave us a place to flourish as distinctly religious Jews amongst distinctly religious Muslims. And they didn't say, because we are a different way of serving God, that we are going to be oppressed. On the contrary, they respected and they made laws for the Jewish people that they can observe the Torah, and we flourished, and our greatest rabbis came out from these nations. Till recently, till when? Till Zionism. This Zionist movement totally destroyed this beautiful fabric, this coexistence. But their narrative to the world when they created their movement was that the ones who are somehow trying to stop our creation of the state, the reason that you're hearing stories, because again, it was before this all mass media and all this different types of ways of we have with satellites and internet and all the different ways of knowing the truth. They came along and they said, you're hearing stories in Palestine that the Arabs are killing the Jews, that the Arabs are objecting to the Jews making them. It's because they hate Jews. It's because they have an ingrained hate to the Jewish people. It's because they're evil and they're the villains, and we the Zionists, they the Zionists, I don't want to say we, and the Zionists, they're the victims. So they created a narrative that sold itself for over 50 years, for almost 75 years. The world bought into this narrative that it must be some terrible people there in Palestine who do not want the Jews to create their homeland, a land for themselves. It's because they hate the Jews. No other reason. And it was a land without a people. So it's just some troublemakers there. Not that it was a people who were living for hundreds and hundreds of years in their homes, and they were simply trying to protect themselves and live their lives that they've had for generations. So the Zionist narrative, the Zionist creation of a state is one total encompassment of rebellions in every way you look at it. It's a rebellion against God. It's evil. It does crime. It does kill. It kills. It murders. It steals. It oppresses, and it defiles the name of the Almighty, and it defiles the name of Judaism. Because again, in order to gain support and to gain legitimacy for their creation of the state, they told the world, we are the accomplishment of the return out of exile that God wants us to do. And it's ours. It's rightfully our piece of land, and God is giving it to us. God, who this world belongs to, is giving it to us. Patently false, patently a lie, a direct lie against the Torah that says that God warned the Jews, do not attempt to leave exile. Do not create a Jewish sovereignty. It's an oath of God. And the rabbis around the world, the rabbis universally said, we put out a 130-year record of religious Jews' opposition to Zionism. The rabbis speak out from around the world, everyone in their own style, the greatest leaders of Judaism, whether it is from the Middle Eastern countries, from Europe, every one of them said, this is criminal, this is horrendous, this is a Nakba. And the Jewish people in the Holy Land, from day one, pleaded with the leaders when there was the chief rabbi. Now, the Zionists, to give this an aura of legitimacy, so they made not only their own nationhood with the strappings of nationhood that around the world is known, but they made a rabbinate and a chief rabbis. And so they put on these chief rabbis these nice-looking clothing that looks like there's some type of a general or something that gives them this aura of respect, as if there's some type of holy being. And they go around the world and declare in the name of God, in the name of the Jewish religion, that what they're doing is holy and not to be second-guessed. You have to accept what they're doing. But the true rabbis of Palestine, who are living there for hundreds of years, these holy men who are living out their years in holiness from around the world, rabbis used to trickle up to Palestine to live off the lives after they would retire in the Holy Land, because the Ottoman Empire, with the Sultan, with all they invited these Jewish people to come. They said, sure, you can come up here and live your lives in holiness. And the Jews flourished in holiness as a small community, but a very holy community. It was considered the elite of the Jewish world. These Jews stood in opposition, just as the Muslims and just as the Christian community. The Jewish community stood and opposed this Zionism. When they heard what the Zionists insidiously are trying to buy land and take over the land, and they heard of Der Yassin and all the other terrible, terrible massacres that was ongoing, that was going daily in this long chain of sorrow that started Zionism from all the way back before 1948. In 1890s and 1900 and at the beginning, when they started creating the Zionist fact on the ground, the rabbis went and met and put out letters. The chief rabbi at the time was Rabbi Dushinsky at the beginning of the 20th century, 1900s. His name was Rabbi Sonnenfeld of blessed memory, Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. And he went and he met with the king of Transjordan in his old years. It was hard for him to move. And he met with the king of Transjordan and he put out letters in Arabic. We have the letters, it's called Traditional Torah Opposition to Zionism. We have the letters that they put out in the Arab papers, and where he pleaded with the leaders of the world. Give me the Al-Aqsa. We have the wording of his, where he said, at that time the Zionists started agitating and going up to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and started saying, oh, this is ours, because they wanted to make a fact on the ground, take over the whole land and Jerusalem and Al-Quds and Al-Aqsa. So Rabbi Sonnenfeld, of blessed memory, at that time in the 1920s, put out a little booklet on many of the issues, what happens, the terrible calamities, every time something new, what the Zionists do. We put out little booklets just to clarify that what they're saying is false and criminal. So in this little booklet that's called the true religious Jewish opposition on Al-Aqsa, anti-Zionist rabbis protest Zionist zealot activity in Al-Aqsa compound. So this was quoting Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. In 1929, he issued a statement in Arabic in a local leading Arabic newspaper called El Salam, clarifying and stating the unambiguous Jewish position in regard to Al-Aqsa and the Temple Mount. And I'm quoting him: the Jews do not want in any way to take that which isn't theirs, and they certainly don't want to contest the rights of other inhabitants to the places held by them, which they regard with honor and considered holy. And in particular, there is no foundation to the rumor that the Jews want to acquire the Temple Mount. On the contrary, from the time that, because of our sins, We were exiled from our land. Our holy temple was destroyed. And we have been lacking the purity required by the Torah. It is forbidden for any Jewish person to set foot upon the grounds of the Temple Mount. It is forbidden for us until the coming of the righteous Messiah, who with the Spirit of the Almighty will rule righteously for the good of all creation, and will return to us the purity required by the Torah to go there. And that is why the Muslim countries never looked at the Jews as a threat, because they know we have a distinctly different belief. Yes, we believe God will recreate a temple. It says God will make it out of fire without the inhuman intervention. So the Muslims said, we have our belief, you have your belief. As long as we're serving God, it's not a problem. So from day one, the rabbis stood up and said, no, we do not accept this Zionist dream, this Zionist story. And when he passed on, that Rabbi Sonnenfeld, the next rabbi was the chief rabbi of the Jewish community. His name was Rabbi Dushinsky, and he was at the time when the Zionists were, unfortunately, with the work of the Satan, able to get the United Nations, which was created to make peace in the world, and that every human being should have the right to coexist. When they was created in that time in the 1940s, it was created just then, and the Zionists came along and got them to ratify their occupation, their racist state amongst the Muslims, that there should be declared a Jewish state, a state of Israel amongst the majority who aren't Jewish. So what did this Rabbi Sonnenfeld, Rabbi Dushinsky said? When the United Nations sent a delegation up to Palestine to see what's going on, should they ratify the state? So I'm sure they asked the Muslim community, and it wasn't the Muslim community who pushed to make a Jewish state. I'm sure it wasn't the Muslim community, and it wasn't the Christian community. But mind you, the Jewish community that was living there for hundreds of years, Rabbi Dushinsky, met, and this is the United Nations records, and he said, we furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. This is in 1942, a declaration before the United Nations. This was... What? 1947.
Yeah, 1947.
1947. That is a year before the United Nations ratified the state. Yet they had the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jewish inhabitants that say, we don't want this. We're opposed to it. But they made it. It was ratified. What did the Jewish people do? They stood up and they demonstrated. We don't have guns. We never had guns. We don't have knives. We stood on the streets and yelled. We demonstrated. So what happened to these Jews that demonstrated? You see, demonstrating in the hundreds of thousands. What happened to the Jews that demonstrate? They got brutally beaten. You can see, we have thousands of pictures. You can see from day one how Jews, children, young children, are brutally beaten, arrested. Jew boys and girls who turn 17 are required, according to their Israeli Satanic law, to go and serve in the IDF. IDF means their army, their brutal army. It's not, but they call it Israeli Defense Force. They're defending. They're defending the Satan. That's what you should know they're defending. But every Jewish boy and girl who turns 17, they get arrested. They become criminals because they refuse to serve in the IDF. You can see pictures of how they're crying behind bars. They put them on forcefully, the army uniform, and you can see how they're praying. They're saying their prayers to God. You can see how they're brutally beaten daily. We have pictures every day what goes on there. They get attacked with different maneuvers, with different ways the Zionists use. They spray the ones who are demonstrating with stink water, chemicals. So their clothes get ruined. They're poor communities because they want to somehow stop the Jews from demonstrating, and it doesn't work. So we have this narrative of 150 years of Jews demonstrating, dying, because our rabbis are murdered from day one. Maybe the first famous martyr was Dr. Dahan, who was murdered in 1924 because he said he's going to go to the British Parliament and declare that the Jews are opposed to the Zionist entity. And they shot him in front of Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, which is in Jerusalem. which is in Al-Quds. And he was maybe the first famous martyr. He's famous because he was very close with the king of Denmark, and there's a monument from over there. The Jewish people daily, and I live in the United States, but I meet the many rabbis who leave because they don't want to be under the occupation. They cry, they hurt, they talk about the pain, the frustration at what is happening to the Palestinian people in the name of us, in the name of the Jewish religion. They use the Jewish religion to intimidate, to silence opposition. They've given it the name Jewish state in order that if anybody speaks up against it, you're against Jews. You're an anti-Semite. So people are fearful of speaking up against this evil, the state of Israel. These Jews who I met cried and talked about their Yassin, about the other stories about how they lived in Jerusalem and what is happening daily to the Palestinian people. We would be speaking constantly. We were in constant touch. We are in touch with our brothers and sisters that are living in Palestine and occupied Palestine. They tell us every day the horrendous murders that is happening in Gaza, in the refugee camps. What was today in Berlin, the refugee camp, Berlin is it called?
Yes, some name like that, close to that.
And every day, and I was in Baja Barajna, they gave me a key, a symbol of the homes in Palestine. They hurt, they remember their homes in Palestine, and they'll never want to forsake their homes. They say, we are going to return. And we cried with them. We went to visit. We went to Gaza because we wanted to show our sympathy, our solidarity with these sufferings. So we went to visit in the orphanages and in the hospitals in Gaza, in Anchorage after the Mavi Marmara. We went and we embraced the people who are shot and maimed and the orphans of the people of Palestine. We went to Gaza after that terrible massacre that happened there. When we went to Gaza, it was a year after that massacre, and we went to visit in Zaytun, the Samuni family, where there was murdered almost around 30 people of one family. We cried with them. What could we say to them? What could we say to such people? Now, this was a year after this terrible massacre. So you would think that the human rights groups around the world would have rebuilt their homes. No, they're still living in squalor and tents and pieces of plastic, and the water is not pure. It brings sicknesses. It goes on and on and on. We as Jews cry, we suffer, and we want the world to know this is not a conflict between religions. This is not a religious conflict. That's the narrative, the evil narrative of the Zionists. You are not anti-Semitic by standing up against this evil. On the contrary, Zionism exacerbates anti-Semitism. Zionism causes a rift between all the Jews. We had grown, we had thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands around the Arabic world that flourished and were religious Jews. They've destroyed, the Zionists destroyed that beautiful coexistence. They've made that, they've forced people to leave their homes in the Arab countries by putting bombs in synagogues. And we have the narratives of Zionists who are disenchanted from Zionism. We have a book called Ben Gurion's Scandals that was written by Giladi, a person who was part of that Zionist movement that put bombs in Iraq. We have so many things I can't, the time does not allow. But they made panic, they made fear that Jews should run away from those lands and to come to the Zionists to be cannon fodder for their idol called the Zionist state of Israel. Jews, again, around the world demonstrate every day, every year, tens and tens of times we stand in front of the United Nations, in tens of thousands of people. In Washington, when Netanyahu comes to visit the president, tens of thousands of Jews. It's never reported by the press because they're fearful of being condemned as anti-Semitic. You're not anti-Semitic. By being silent, You are supporting anti-Semitism. You're creating anti-Semitism because how much bloodshed of the Palestinians, how much bloodshed of Jews and of hate and of animosity to Jews is created by this Zionist movement. Their hands are covered in blood. We stood today in Toronto here. We stood across from their celebration of this Zionist evil, of this Nakba. We stood across when they ended their march in front of some Holocaust memorial. How dare they use the Holocaust when they colluded with the Nazis, because the Nazis wanted the Jews out of Austria, out of Germany, and they wanted the Zionists wanted the Jews to go to Palestine, and they colluded together. Some people say that can't be, that it's exaggeration. We have the documents. We have a book called The Holocaust Victims Accused. We have many documents. I'll just quote one word from the first president of the Zionist state of Israel. His name is Chaim Weizmann, and we have his quotes. This is quoted in many papers. This is from one place. It's called the Jewish Press, a Zionist print in October 18th, 2002. And they had a meeting of the Zionists in the 1930s when Jews were starting to be murdered by the Nazis. And they had a meeting because they had powerful groups of Zionists, and they had money, deep pockets, and they could have saved Jews. At this meeting, Chaim Weizmann stated, Palestine cannot absorb the Jews of Europe. We want only the best of the Jewish youth to come to us. We want only the educated to enter Palestine for the purpose of increasing its culture. Educated doesn't mean rabbis. It means doctors and lawyers and scientists. We want only the educated to enter Palestine for the purpose of increasing its culture. The other Jews will have to stay where they are and face whatever fate awaits them. These millions of Jews are dust on the wheels of history and may have to be blown away. We don't want them pouring into Palestine. We don't want Tel Aviv to become another low-grade ghetto. Imagine that. This, you would think, is some rabid anti-Semite. Yes, he was a rabid anti-Semite, but you would think this is a Nazi who's saying this. Imagine a Jew who's cold-bloodedly, he hears how Jews are being murdered, that their lives are in the greatest danger possible, and he sits there cold-bloodedly and says that there millions of Jews are dust on the wheels of history. We don't want them pouring into, we don't want Tel Aviv to become a low-grade ghetto. He disdained, he hated Jews like me. Let them die and not come into Palestine. The words are beyond aghast, they're beyond anything that you can imagine. And he became the first president of the state of Israel. He represents everything that Zionism is. And yes, he represents everything that Zionism is. The evil, the deep evil of what it is. But let's just quote two more little quotes. The first, of course, the father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, wrote in his diary. Imagine, he wrote in his diary, this is the hero of Zionism, and he wrote, the way to solve the problem of anti-Semitism is to speak to the head priest of Vienna to get an appointment with the Pope to make a mass conversion of all the Jews of Austria to Catholicism. It should be done on a Sunday in the middle of the day with music and pride publicly. We are the last generation that held on to the faith of our forefathers. The conversion would be in St. Stephen's Cathedral. Imagine, we died in the Inquisition in Spain. We died throughout history because we are Jews, and we proudly teach our children that we should die if, God forbid, somebody tries to make us leave our religion. Comes this heretic, Theodor Herzl, the despicable person, this monster, and he says that we should, with pride and music, publicly, all the Jews should convert to Catholicism. That is a solution for the suffering of Jews. Jabotinsky, who was the great leader of Zionism, he was the mentor of Begin, who was a prime minister of Israel. Jabotinsky was the founder of revisionist Zionism. And he wrote in a newspaper, in a Haaretz newspaper, in October 22nd, 1919. This is the beginning of Zionism. Imagine, this is something that is not a secret. He wrote it in the newspaper. He said, in the national home, we will announce that those Jews who have on themselves the rust of exile, and they refuse to shave off their beards and earlocks, the payest earlocks, will be second-class citizens and not have a right to vote. When there was a rabbi who repeated these statements, and he asked the people who came for his speech, he said, who said this? Somebody said, oh, Hitler said it. He said, no, no, no. The leaders of Zionism said this. Jabotinsky said this, that Jews with beards are second-class citizens and not have the right to vote. These are the heroes of Zionism. This is the Shaitan, the Satan, that today drapes around the world.
Shaitan, when you say that, Shaitan.
That's the Satan. That's the what? It's the evil, the essence of evil. How dare they speak and claim they're speaking in the name of my holy religion, in our name, and that they have the right to say they represent the religion and represent godliness. How dare they steal all the youth, the Jewish youth, and the gullible people, and use fear-mongering and tell them in the narrative that the Arabs hate the Jews just because they have their nationalist ambitions to create a home. This is evil, the essence of evil, pure evil, and we pray to God to bring an end to this evil. Let me just end with one more little thing by the Second World War, because there we have that people finally recognize the evil. People don't recognize the evil of Zionism today, unfortunately. But the evil of Nazism we recognize. Well, you know, I mentioned what Chaim Weizmann said, but let's just finish it off with it. They had a person who was called Yitzchak Greenbaum. He was the chairperson of the Jewish Agency's Rescue Committee, that they put him to rescue Jews who were being murdered by the Nazis. And he said, and this is his quote, he said, when they asked me, couldn't you give money out of the UJA, United Jewish Appeal, which is a Jewish, their money-making source? So he said, they asked me, couldn't you give money out of the United Jewish Appeal for the rescue of Jews in Europe? I said, no. And I say again, no. One should resist this wave which pushes Zionist activities to secondary importance. In other words, to take money out of the Zionist coffers to save Jews? No. You're making Zionism secondary importance. I let them say that I am anti-Semitic. Let them say what they want. I will not demand that the Jewish Agency allocates a sum of 300,000 or 100,000 pounds sterling to help European Jewry. And I think that whoever demands such a thing is performing an anti-Zionist act. I could go on and on and on. We have these crazy quotes, things that would be funny if it wouldn't be so tragic. The tragedy lives on. Every day, the people, millions and millions of descendants of the people of Palestine, whether they're living today in Palestine or they're living, yes, in Palestine, not Israel, in Palestine. In Palestine. Remember, Palestine, it's being stolen with the name, the State of Israel, but it is Palestine. Every day, they suffer physically, emotionally, psychologically. There is not enough words to express the suffering of the people of Palestine. And amongst them, the Jewish people who are under the oppression of the Zionists living in the other parts of occupied Palestine, whether it be Mea Shearim or Beit Shemesh or Bnei Brak, or wherever it may be. These Jews are all suffering, and we around the world, as human beings, as other Jews and as non-Jews, as Muslims, as Arabs around the world, we are all suffering by the repercussions and by the existence of the Zionist State of Israel. We plead with every human being who has in him a sense of righteousness, of justice. They should pray to the Almighty, because ultimately it is the Almighty who will bring an end to this evil. Let us pray that God should bring a speedy and peaceful, total removal of this impediment to peace, of this cause of bloodshed, of the rivers of blood. Bring an end to the Zionist State of Israel. Remove it peacefully and speedily in our days as God can with his compassion. At the same time, Do not be intimidated. Do not be silent. Stand up for the people of Palestine as much as you can. Stand up for the people of Gaza. Stand up for the people in refugee camps. Stand up for them. Speak up. Just be careful. Don't call it the Jews or the Jewish state, because then they'll get you. It's not a Jewish state, and you have a right to speak up. Look at the Jewish communities around the world. Invariably, the more the religious the community, the more anti-Zionist. You look in Mea Shearim in Jerusalem. You look in New York, in right across from Manhattan, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, where it's the largest concentration of religious leaders. There's not one Zionist flag. There's not one Israeli flag there. You go to London, the very religious community in Stamford Hills. You will go to Montreal. Wherever there is a very religious community, they are anti-Zionist. That should give you the fortitude, the encouragement to stand up and not be intimidated and speak up for the people of Palestine, and God will help. We will speak up, we will do, and God with his compassion will bring, inshallah, sooner nowadays, a peaceful removal of the Zionist state of Israel, so we could, as Jews, we can turn to the Palestinians and say, here is your home, here is your freedom, here is your self-respect. God should help. We should all be able to serve God in harmony sooner nowadays. Amen. Assalamu alaikum.
Ameen. Ameen, Ya Allah. Thank you.